What is the situation of the country today?
What is the situation of the country today? The Sandinistas were in power for a little more than 10 years. They tried to make a lot of big changes. Meanwhile, the U.S. was working very hard to undermine the changes that they were making and to have better control over the government that was in power. And so we got the Contra Wars, which you'll read about and learn about, I'm sure, as you do some of the research. And a lot of manipulation from the big U.S. powerful lobbies. In the end, the Sandinistas, in an election that was declared fair and so on by observers, was voted down, and another government, which was a coalition, and Violeta Chamorro is the name of the woman who led this coalition of very unusual political persuasions that came together. I was here when that happened. Kim, my husband, was down there with a group of students who had gotten the training and so on, and were official observers for these elections. And I was shocked to hear that the Sandinistas had lost, first of all, when I heard it on the news the next morning. The other thing I heard immediately, just a breath after saying that the Sandinistas had lost, was to say that an embargo that the U.S. had on anything being sent to Nicaragua had just been lifted. They were obviously very well orchestrated things. The embargo had really affected anything we could do with exchanges, with sending help down there. We couldn't send any medicines, we couldn't send any tools, we couldn't even send school supplies officially through the, by going down there or taking them, because there was this very stiff embargo. At that time, we were able to send some stuff through a Canadian group that we connected with, who was also working on some people connections down there on Ometepe. So it was it shouldn't have been, but it was a big surprise to me that the very moment that the U.S. got its way in who was going to be in power, they also lifted the embargo that had been strangling this whole country and not allowing any changes to come about, democratically even. When they were down there, they also found my husband and the students were there the day of the election. Total quiet all through the towns. Even in Managua, nobody was sure what was going to happen, because they were first maybe afraid that the Sandinistas might have I want to say some kind of protests and so on, saying this wasn't a fair election, this can't work and all this. In fact, what happened was that they ceded and said, yes, you've won. But the opposition that had come together, that was made up of very strange, the communists, the right wing, the very religious, and so on, plus those who were trying to just be, to bring about a new government that would be non-Sandinista. They just waited for 2 days. There was no reaction, nothing happened, because everyone was afraid. So being in a situation like that, it's so tense and so difficult to, even if you've had an election, even if you think it was all fair and so on, it was still a very tense time to make the transition. The transition happened then after that, and Violeta Chamorro took charge, and the U.S. helped again by not having an embargo, and as far as I'm concerned, meddling again in other ways. What's happened after all these years for me, seeing the changes that are happening, especially on Ometepe, is that, and talking to people down there, learned that medical things are not as available as they used to be when they were subsidized. The education system has become a lot more difficult for people who are poor to be part of, because it costs a lot more. It's a lot more restricted. And so the effects just go through these cycles where after the revolution, when we were meeting with people who had lived way out in the rural areas, the older people were saying, we had never had any hopes that we would be able to read and write, or our children certainly would be able to read and write and become part of perhaps an educated class. We're just so thrilled. You couldn't go back to the way it had been before, with as working as serfs on the farms of very large owners. The whole country, there were, I think it was 2% of the people owned 90% of the land. It's that sort of situation that had been there before. Now the Sandinistas had tried to, had seized land that people had fled from, and tried to make new co-ops and organize people who didn't know how to read and write and so on. Huge task that they took on. So we do have, the changes that I've seen have been that, and been working with a coffee cooperative, an organic producer farm that makes coffee, and plantains are a big export crop, and other things. People have been able to go to college, their children have been able to finish school and go on to college, come back as professionals, some of them. There have been some very good changes, but we're also seeing that there are a lot of economic suppression that's going on, and changes in what programs are available through the government.
How would you evaluate the success of the work you and others have done with the people of Ometepe?
We have a little motto that says, projects aren't what we're about, it is the relationships with these people, between us and them. That is the most important thing. That's what we're really nurturing. So the success in terms of programs we've got and projects we've got going has been good, but to me the fact that we've had so many exchanges and so many people have gone down there and made friends, become connected with people there, are very worried when they hear about an earthquake or something down in Nicaragua, because they know some people who live there, are worried about how this family is doing or something. It just, the heart that's in it for all these people who have been down there, or have had people from Nicaragua come and live with them, even for a short time, is what I consider to be the biggest success of it all. It broadens everybody's minds and hearts. It makes you realize that there are a lot of things we have in common. There are a lot of things we don't have in common, but need to learn about from each other. And that the disparities, economic and so on, that we see here in the U.S. and in other countries, how they work, what makes them work. There's a lot of learning that's gone on between the two. As far as programs, we've got a whole lot of different things that we're doing. One is importing coffee from this cooperative. It's organically grown, shade grown, and we pay extra premiums for keeping it organic, keeping it shade grown, so that they keep the forests and don't cut down all the trees in order to make them produce faster, that sort of thing. And use that money up here. There are people involved, volunteers involved in bagging the coffee, in selling the coffee. We make about 50% of the money is considered profits because some of it goes for transport, some of it is going for roasting the coffee. The coffee itself loses quite a bit of weight because as it's roasted, it doesn't weigh as much.